Assalamualaikum and good afternoon, everyone. Now, in today's session, we are going to look into an element that many will find interesting, especially if you are into content creation and creative writing or even storytelling. Also, this element prepares you for assessment 3, which comes very, very soon, right? Now, when talking about creating stories in general, you must first understand that there is a structure that makes a story. Now, while this structure varies depending on your creativity, commonly it helps audience understand what's happening in the story. And also, as the writer, understanding this structure actually helps your story progress from one step to another, right? Now, let's take a famous story, for example, Cinderella. At the beginning of the story, we are presented with an introduction to the characters, especially Cinderella's character, who lives with her evil stepmother and her stepsisters, who treat her like a slave in their own house. Now, one day, they receive an invitation to a royal ball where stepmother and stepsisters go, but leave Cinderella behind. But Cinderella finds help from her fairy godmother, who gives her a pretty makeover for the ball. Now she goes to the event, meets the prince, but has to leave suddenly because the spell is about to end and accidentally leaves her shoe at the castle. Everything else that happens after that is history, which of course ends with Cinderella and the prince living happily ever after. Now, you might not realize this, but your understanding of the story is very much helped by the structure of the story. And that's what we are looking at today. Now, introduction, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. Each of these elements comes one after another in every story that you have read or listened to in your life. Introduction, as the name suggests, introduces us to the characters and the setting of the story, which can include time and place. As most fairy tale would start, once upon a time in a land far, far away, there lived a pretty girl in a cottage. Now, that is the simplest way that you can start introducing the story. Now, once the main characters are introduced, we move on to the rising action. This is the part that brings us to the direction of the story. Is there something happening to the character? What happens to the village? Or are they going somewhere in the village? Now, these elements are introduced in rising action. Then comes the climax, where the turning point comes. In conflict, of course, conflicts happen. All right, characters may fight or argue with one another. Some characters may die or become the bad person. Technically, many can happen in a conflict. It's entirely up to you to decide. Now, the conflict waters down in what we call the falling action. Things start to get less chaotic. Conflicts sink, and here we know the story is about to end. Last but not least, the resolution. Here, the story comes to an end where issues are resolved. People meet and live happily ever after, as many story would end, right? Now, as mentioned before, each of these elements comes one after another to make up this one clear structure of the story. We call this structure a plot. Now, understanding a plot will actually allow you to make a story on your own. Right now, the question right now is, can you make your own story? Now, that's what you need to do for activity 12.1 this week. All right. Now, over here, you can see a series of pictures or images numbered from 1 until 5. 5 pictures technically represent each part of the plot, which are introduction, rising, climax, falling, and resolution. Now, as you may have guessed, you need to come up with a story that combines all pictures. 5 pictures, one story. Now, you may follow the order, as in picture 1 represents introduction, picture 2 rising, and so on and so forth. However, you can also jumble up the order. Depending on your creativity, picture 5 may be the introduction, or picture 1 can be the climax. Imagination is actually your greatest invention. So don't be scared to play around with it. All right? Now, please understand that I'm not asking you to create 5 stories. Create one story from these 5 images combined. Now, trust me, it will test your creativity and you'll be surprised of the outcome if you really think of it. Now, this is an activity for you to complete over the weekend. What you have to do is just simply sit down and analyze each of these pictures. What can you do with these pictures? Combine the ideas to make one great story at the end of the day. All right. Now, if you have any questions at all, feel free to ask me. Until then, have fun, have a good weekend, and assalamu alaikum.